Hey, welcome to another episode of Talking Impact. Today we have Alison Springer, who is a gifted communicator, has spoken for over 30 years through her organization, Young Women of Power. She worked with Impact Society for many years, helped develop the Heroes 2 program. Her story is in the Heroes 2 program, but today you get to see behind the scenes of what inspired her to become a woman of power, to inspire that next generation, to walk alongside youth, not just to speak, but to empower them, to excite them, and to give them something that they can hold on to for the rest of their lives. We touch on some hot topics like causes and apathy and authenticity as the core antidote to the problems that we see in so many young lives today. And I know you're going to enjoy this conversation. Welcome to Talking Impact, your go-to podcast for exploring the powerful connection between mental health, education, and resilient youth. Join us as we uncover insights and stories that inspire classrooms, stronger minds, brighter futures, and a lasting impact in our society. So you're still based out of Calgary?
Mm-hmm. Yep, I'm still here in the city, and I'm speaking, working with youth. I'm part-time teaching at a school here in the city as well, but yeah, no, I'm still committed. I've been working with youth for full-time, I think 30 years or so. Yeah, still doing it.
It's been a long career. Hey? I want to get into that, how you started and what your passion was and your origin story, but before that, like you're the founder of Young Women of Power. You worked with Impact Society back in the day. The original version of Heroes 2, you had a huge part to play in that. Your story's in the newest version of Heroes 2. And you and I connected early on, and you were doing a lot of public speaking. That really is you're a master of that craft of public speaking, but not just public speaking for the sake of being a sage on the stage, but really that young women of power. Like, it's about empowering others and giving them some tools through that art, through that process of speaking. Tell me a bit about what your organization does, how you go about it, and where where that all came into being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, it has been about encouraging students. You know, I remember a long time ago when I was just coming out of my teen years. It was my first year at college, and I had gone back for a practicum job, or not practicum job, but for a job back in Ontario, and I was working, in Toronto. And so I got to see a lot of my friends. And one of my friends, I didn't know, because I grew up in Hamilton, I didn't really get to see him and know the inside stuff on his story, but he was like living in Toronto for that time. I learned that he was excluded from his family. Like, he just, because of his beliefs and such, his family, which was contrary to what his family believed, he was banned to his bedroom, and he lived there, he ate there, he wasn't allowed to interact with his sibling, like all that kind of stuff. Yet this guy was involved in leadership, he was involved in student leadership, he was involved in the community, and you would never guess by looking at him. And I was like, wow, you know, with my family, like, I just go, they tell me what to do, I just do it. And here's this guy, and even just my faith, like, I've just walked in that. But here's this guy that has no support at home, and he would have been grade 12 at that time, and was just continuing to empower, encourage other people, and not having that encouragement necessarily himself. And when I found out his story, I was like, you know what? I want to encourage students who don't necessarily have that same kind of encouragement that I had at home in their own walk, in their own personal journey. And so that kind of inspired me focusing on youth, and why I'm committed to this day on empowering teens, because there's a lot of stories behind closed doors that we don't know about, you know, and just to be a person that sees them and is able to kind of call them out in their gifts and their abilities to a higher place. That's what I want to do, because they can. But some that just need that encouragement.
So that was like the early origins. You saw someone else doing it, and you were connected and got inspired to go and do it yourself. How did you get into the public speaking side of it, and maybe a little bit more about the craft that you are so well versed at? how did you develop that strength and that skill set?
Yeah, well, I was a youth pastor for a number of years. And anytime I had kids that were graduating, I would go to the grade 12 graduation ceremonies. And I remember sitting there and hearing they'd bring in some speaker, a business person, Olympian, and here they are speaking to all these grade 12 students, along with the most important people in their lives. So that's their parents, their grandparents, their favorite aunts, uncles, are all in one room, including their coaches and their teachers. So as a youth pastor, I was like, oh my goodness, like the most influential people in a kid's life are all in the same room at that time and at that moment. And I was like, what would you say? And I found those kids would just be, talking to their friends. They weren't paying attention to whoever it was the celebrity speaker sort of thing. And it's because they weren't speaking to where they were at, And I remember thinking, oh man, if I had an opportunity to share with those kids on that platform, what would I say? And even just an awareness that there were other people that could know, like, no, we specialize in working with teens. What would we say? And so that was the beginning of it for me. Yeah.
Back then, if you can remember, what was it that you would say, that you wanted to say that wasn't being said by those celebrity guests?
I think it was seeing life as a clean slate now, a blank canvas, and where are you moving forward? Like, what does that look like? And so it's not so much motivational, but I think it was more recognizing your value and what you bring to the world, and that there's so much more than beyond you, that that what you say, what you do, how you interact with people can create a significant ripple effect, not just in your life, but in society. And so encouraging kids to think bigger and to think on purpose, and to believe for sure that they can.
Someone who's studied and done this craft, you're probably well beyond your 10,000 hours of public speaking at this point. How do you get that message across? Like, you only have so much time, you got a big audience, and you can't do what the teacher does or the mom and dad do in terms of that long-term engagement. What is the way in that moment in time that you've learned to actually see that empowerment, not just the here's what I want them to hear, but how do I actually get it to resonate and something that they can carry on going forward?
My main focus in communicating is recognizing the value of self and as well the value of other people. For me, when it comes to preparing a message, there's different ways that you could communicate this. So, one, I listen to what's in my heart. Or coming from a faith background, I'll ask God, I'm like, God, the students that are here in this audience, what do they need to hear? Or just being quiet and listening to what is being said in my heart. And then I'll write it down. And from that place, I'm like, okay, this is where I recognize where I need to focus and what's lacking or what's needing and for that group. And so it's interesting when I have teachers and different people come up to me and they're like, oh my goodness, when you were saying this, you were looking directly at this specific kid. And that's exactly what they needed to hear. But I mean, that's not
There's like
me.
an intuition there.
Yeah, it's not, and it's just in a sense by chance, or it's a God thing or whatever, but it's being intentional and something I think that really makes a difference too, Chris, is like I can have a speech, but really speaking into students. I was speaking at a school in London, a high school, London, Ontario, and the teacher came up to me, the advisor, he came up to me afterwards and he said, when you speak, like you're having a conversation with the kids. It's like you're conversing with them. Yeah. You're not looking up, you're not looking down, you're looking right into them and you're talking and speaking to them. And so for me, I know that my words make a difference and that changes a mindset when you're as a communicator. And so just speaking to those students on a deep heart level
Yeah.
and believing in them, and just, I think this is really important, seeing them versus here's a massive crowd, but no, I see the individual in the crowd, you know?
Yeah. So many people when they're doing public speaking are trying to either memorize a script, and you got to be really good at memorizing a script to make it look like it's not memorized. Do you memorize a script, or do you have a pattern? Do you have like a destination, and then it's just more of a conversation based on your experience and what you're feeling from the room? How do you go about what's the art or what's the craft behind it?
Oh, you're asking all the secrets,
Yeah,
guy. You're
absolutely.
asking the
Well, there's
secrets.
teachers listening, I'm sure, and not everyone knows how to engage with a group and bring out the answers from them or to speak into them. And oftentimes it's I got to give a lecture, I got to be the knowledge expert versus the guide.
Okay. So in developing speeches, in the beginning, like usually the principle anyways, and this is what I teach too, you memorize the intro and the conclusion because those need to be the strongest. To capture the student's attention, how much time you got to do that, you want to hit that strong. And so memorize that. And same thing with the conclusion, being very intentional about your call to action and what you want from them. But in between, so how I do it, in between I have my points and all that kind of stuff, and I've gotten pretty comfortable speaking to points. And I think I was in Toastmasters for a number of years, and that helped me.
Great way to train.
Yeah, understand the science of public speaking, and something that was significant that switched from the memorization of a speech to speaking from the heart was spontaneous Miss Universe questions.
Ha.
Yeah, because there's certain things that you just know that, I mean, you get a Miss Universe question, you have to speak off the top of your head kind of thing, right? But there's certain topics that you can speak about without looking at your notes.
Right.
And it was something that I observed. And so, for example, tell me about yourself. Okay, like you know where you grew up.
Yeah.
Like there's just certain things you don't need notes from.
Yeah.
And I believe when it comes to communicating, what is like your life message? And when you speak out of that place, you don't need notes. Like it doesn't need to be memorized necessarily. So for me, as a professional speaker, and I've been doing this for a good number of years now. So there's some talks that I have memorized in my head now, but to keep it fresh, like I feed off of the audience. So I feed off of energy. And so depending on what the kids bring and what they give, and if they give me comments or shouting stuff out, like I'm interacting with them, I'm still there, you know? But I know what my purpose is and what I'm trying to get across in regards to the message. And so that's something that's helpful. With new talks, I mostly have points, and I know where I'm going and what I want to have said. And sometimes with students, not sometimes, I like to have lines that are memorable, and I like to use repetition or visual illustrations so that they remember it. And I think that that's some of the main stuff, like when it comes to communicating, how will I get these kids to remember what I'm saying, and is it worth remembering?
Right.
Yeah.
I heard somewhere along the way, you make it rhyme and it's more likely to be remembered. So it's something too, it's in terms of those catchphrases, like to repeat the same thing, but if it rhymes, they're more likely to recall it when they hear any of the rhyming words in the future. Do you find that that's an effective little tactic to get things going?
Yeah, I totally do. I use it in one of my main speeches. The things today that you despise will one day cause you to rise. You know, and it's to help them remember, but as well, it's a message that it's interesting because I've had kids, like people say, oh no, people will never remember what you say as a speaker. But no way, I have kids that have heard me speak 20 years ago, and they'll come back and they'll remember that line or what it is that I spoke about, you know, and that's what matters.
Very cool.
Yeah.
What like you talked about your life message and your life story, and I would love to know, like, it's like a lot of people, like I was speaking at a conference this week and shared, my introduction into heroes, which actually I think you were one of the trainers when I got my initial training back in like 2009 or 2010, and I remember that. I don't remember the exact words or phrases, but I remember those moments, and I still remember, obviously gifts and abilities and a desire to succeed. And so much of when I'm doing talks, whether it's with individuals or at conferences, I'm sharing my own story and my reason why I do what I do is, working with youth, being an at-risk youth and working with at-risk youth, working in addictions and mental health, and always wanting to get ahead of the curve. That's the passion, that's the purpose, intertwining that with my life story. When I think of like a teacher who's engaging with the classroom, there's oftentimes that fear or sometimes that thing holding them back, like, oh, I can't share too much or I can't disclose too much, but I still want to be able to make that connection. Where's that safe boundary between withholding and not engaging and engaging but going too far?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And for sure, being in the classroom right now, like I'm aware of that. And so what would I say would the line be? I think what's been dealt with. So the stuff that I'm currently going through, I don't necessarily share, especially when there's a question mark at the end. But something that I've just gone through, I'll share it. And there is power in transparency, because I know I was just talking with a teacher, and the kids asked her a question about her life, and she shared and she was honest about it, and what a rapport, it just changed the dynamic. And I noticed that even with the podcast that I listen to, when people are raw and transparent, sometimes I'm like, are you crazy? Can't believe you shared that. I changed, like, the way I view you is different. But no way, like, I listen in all the more, and there's more people listening too. And I believe that we are a generation that longs for, I don't want to hear your perfection. I want to hear the mess.
So true. Think about like Instagram, social media. One of the big factors of why is this so bad for mental health, especially for youth, is you're seeing people's highlight reels, their perfection, their false perfection, and you're comparing that to your own reality, and it steals the joy. Comparison being the thief of joy there, but it's also that like expectation that if you're not good enough. To your point, like that craving of authenticity isn't just I don't think it just stops there. I think under the surface is really this desire to be seen, to be known, and to know that where we're at is not it, and it's not the end of it, right? Those things we despise cause us to rise, but if we don't know that that's happening, and we're not at that age yet where we even understand that like this is just someone's highlight reel, or this is just fiction, or just someone's top 10, we start to look at ourselves as so much less, and we start to despise not just those things out there, but the thing in here.
That's good. Yep.
What, like, talking about that generational piece of craving that authenticity and not wanting just the perfection stories. How have you seen that evolve, or have you seen the challenges that youth are facing change or not change over the last 20, 30 years? You've worked with probably hundreds of thousands of young people over your career. Has much changed at the core?
I think that, so I did quite a bit of work with Calgary's judicial system, and I made sure I stayed there for the longest time, because I felt like it was giving me a good pulse on what's happening with culture and what's even up and coming. And I took a break for a good amount of time, and then just touched base with the team, and I just felt like things needed to change with what I was doing and how I was delivering it. And what I noticed from that, and even talking with the probation officers and those that are working with the kids, is that the crimes that kids are committing are increasing, and there's more.
It's like potency.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a number of reasons for it, but even just with what we're talking about right now, like, kids really need to know where we've messed up, so that they're not making the same mistakes and then worse. And so like past pain can be such a beautiful storytelling, teaching moment. And I believe that we need more of that, and even learning how. Like, I know even for myself, like when I see somebody that's super transparent, I'm like, I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I can do it. But I'm believing that I'm on a journey, you know, to get me to that place where I can be, because it's needed.
Yeah.
Kids need it. And yeah, they're floundering because they're lacking, anyways, generally speaking, I'll say, they're just lacking a different kind of advice, not just a, let me tell you what to do. You know, I was at an event, and I've never experienced anything like this before, Chris, and it was beautiful. Anyways, they had all those that were 30 and under in a group, and they had all of us that were above 30 to come alongside them. And the facilitator asked the question, and it was kind of like a fill in the blank. A mistake I've made that I've learned, or I can't remember how he worded it. It was something like, something I would never do again. Something that I've learned from my past. It was something like that. Like, where have I made a major mistake that I would not do again? And that I would want you to know about and pass on to you. And it was so valuable. And so what it turned into was past pain, mistakes, turning into beautiful wisdom.
Cool.
It was the coolest thing. And so what happened is, remember, we had all these, there were older people, we were all different ages and such. And it was like, get a mentor. You know, I would, instead of trying to do things on my own, I would have a mentor for these different areas in my life. Not care what other people think so much, or not be afraid of what people think. And it was just so sweet, because all of a sudden our own past pains and things that we've learned, like, it could actually be used for good, you know? And it didn't come off as a, I told you so. Like, it was nothing like that. It wasn't a heavy, oh, all these adults telling me this because they messed up on their lives or whatever. No, it was the most sweetest, beautiful thing I've ever experienced before.
Very cool. It reminds me of what we talk about, and like, what does high resilience look like? What's the hallmark of it? And it's the ability to make meaning out of your past and your present into your future. And low resilience is not just that, you know, I don't want to get up in the morning, I don't see what's happening in the future. It's that loss of hope, but it's also that loss of the ability to, again, like, make meaning out of things that have happened in my past, to the extent where what has happened to me, my circumstances, or those labels that I've adopted, are who I truly am. And that authenticity that can come from a mentorship relationship, or doing some introspective work, going through the Heroes programs, is that ability to then start to see and start to separate from who I am from my walls, who I am from those circumstances, is step one. And then step two is to actually be like, oh, those were actually stepping stones. Those were actually opportunities. That's where I grew the most. We look back at our own stories. Those are the times when we learned the most, when we went through the stuff, is usually when we know how much we got to give. Whereas if we just accept it, fall into learned helplessness, we tend to just accept it and identify as it, and as a result, live either a life of quiet desperation or loud destruction. Talked about mentorship, and I'm just curious, like, who've been some of your key mentors along your journey to impacting young people?
I think of one lady, Gloria House, and she became my mentor when I first moved to Calgary. We worked in the east end of Calgary, which is like the east end in a lot of cities, but it was, tough neighborhood, okay? And just, lots of brokenness, just stuff that's going on, not the easy-go-lucky family, whatever, just different family dynamics. Anyways, and she was my mentor, and she was this really petite newfie. And but was so full of zeal and passion, and she could bring down the biggest guy, kind of thing. But what I learned from her was, in fact, that's where I got my heart for community.
Cool.
So even though I was working in the church and was looking at maybe working in the church, she gave me a heart for the community and working with the kids in the community versus just being inside the walls of the church, but to go out into the neighborhood and interacting with kids and families and all that kind of stuff. And so that's where that started. And from there, because of it, I had such a passion for being in the schools and working, collaborating as well with other organizations. And so my mind's always been that way. And I think I attribute that to her.
I think we both have that in common. We collected different mentors over the years, and I think one that we shared was Jack, founder of Impact Society. How did you get caught up with Jack and Impact? And I didn't know you worked with them for a long time, but how did that journey start?
Yeah, so that was collaborating with a community in the sense of, at the time, Jack was involved with the church. He was, I think, pastoring a church. He was pastoring a church in the Northeast. I was in the East End of Calgary as well. And a bunch of us youth pastors, we would all gather together and we would just pray for our community, pray for our kids, pray for our schools, and all that kind of stuff. And we'd meet at different locations. And one time we met at wherever Jack's church was, and he had a youth pastor that was there. And so that's how I first met him. And he was interested in each person's life. And he also was doing work in his local school at that time. And then I found out for sure his heart for being in the school. And I had a heart for being in my school. I was volunteering as a basketball coach and badminton, volleyball, all that kind of stuff in the local high school. And then Jack was developing this character development curriculum stuff and was doing it in the schools and presented it, that it was something that I could do in the schools. And I was interested because I wanted to, it was ended up being my favorite place to be, was in the schools, and then to be able to do some teaching. And so Jack, from him, I learned about working with community leaders. And I think something, even for those online that come from a faith background, I think it's important, like sometimes when you're in the church community, whatever your faith background is, our world can get really small sometimes, where we just stick with this group of people, and this is our understanding, and that's all there is to it. But one of the things that I learned from Jack was about being a really good listener, listening to people's stories, and hearing people, like really hearing people. And out of that place, then you can work with them to come up with some solutions. But oftentimes, and sometimes unfortunately, the Christian community, we've got a bit of a bad rep on this, and we've done it to ourselves, where we just quickly jump into situations and try and help people without hearing, learning, understanding people, the dynamics and what needs to happen there. And we just come in with our mindset with
trying
what
to
we
inflict something on someone to get a quick fix.
Yeah, exactly. And so with Jack, that's something that I've learned, and it's expanded my view and has helped me to be more efficient and I think effective when it comes to people, because not only am I a public speaker and people are like, oh, Alison, you talk. And I'll talk. But what makes me really strong is that I'm a very good listener too, and just hearing people. And I don't have to talk. I can listen to a story. And out of that place, from hearing people, then I speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So important, and like so many are want to get it all done in an hour, or they want to give the I have a dream speech and see monumental change all in a moment, and those occur very far between, and so often you know it's the hype that gets people excited and like, oh, let's do it again, but where's the rest of the story, and the real transformation doesn't happen in that moment in time. It can get inspired, but what happens after is so much, not so much more important, but it needs to be balanced, I guess. What did you learn, or what have you seen, or even in your experience working in programs that impact in that, like the importance? And we were talking about this earlier, actually, of like, the assembly and the exciting session, the hype session, complemented with, or the inspiration complemented with the journey and the tools and the support. How do you see, or how did you see those things working together, and how did that shape your view or your theory in terms of youth development and empowerment?
Yeah. So coming in and doing an assembly, you're the auntie, the favorite auntie, and everybody likes you, loves you, high fives you, all that kind of stuff. But the after part, being able to have that rapport with students, and then going off into the classroom afterwards to doing a deep dive on things and building a relationship with students. That's one thing that I think the reason why I'm teaching part-time in a school is because, I know it's a one shot, one chance kind of a thing when it comes to public speaking, and I value that place, and I'll make the most of that. But to be able to walk with kids, wow. So the school I'm at, like, I get to walk with them from grade 7 to grade 12, and that, how valuable, like, and for the teachers that are there, I mean, sometimes it's tiresome. It is, not sometimes. It is tiresome, but what a privilege it is to walk with kids and see them grow and help them, support them, walking alongside with them. And that's what I see the Heroes program definitely can do. So it's the presentation, the assembly opens minds, helps them to begin to think bigger in an entertaining, safe way, And then in the classroom, it's the practical, so how do I live this out? And that's what the curriculum actually does.
So working with students, especially that age group, like that's the demographic, that's adolescence. Identity formation is happening, whether we like it or not at that time, and the work that both of us do and dedicate our lives to is helping young people to build that identity in the right way with their strengths and with a sense of purpose. What, when you're walking with students and working with them, what are some of the biggest challenges that you're seeing from them, whether it's bullying, drugs, alcohol, but even more so under the surface? What are some of the big pain points that you see?
Apathy. So not caring is something that I'm seeing, and it being replaced with the computer. Like,
Is it because they feel safe behind the computer?
Is it because they feel safe? That's a good question, Chris. I just know that there's so many distractions, and it keeps them from feeling and being passionate about something that matters.
It's hard.
So I've got kids that'll fight me, or stand up or speak up about something that isn't, when I say isn't relevant, but I remember somebody telling me a long time ago, Alison, you're so passionate and you're a fighter for justice, but you're fighting the wrong battles. And they didn't expand on what that meant. I just made mental note of it. And I was like, so what am I doing wrong? And sometimes, like, there was a season, with young women of power and just being passionate about empowering women and helping females grow in confidence and educating people on the importance of working together and all that kind of stuff. But man, people knew how to get under my skin. They would say things like, I remember somebody saying females can't be ninjas. Now,
Come on.
I know it sounds lame, but I was like, what are you talking about? And it would just get under my skin, and they would just, in board meetings and around tables like this or whatever, they would say different things about things that females couldn't do, or I don't know. It got up on my skin, and it was something that I'd fight and speak up about and stand up for. And I don't think those were the right battles. They weren't. They just exhausted me, and people were entertained by my passion, you know?
Yeah.
But just understanding, like, what's the core of the issue? What's actually going on here? And I feel like kids, there's a lot of causes that society will speak into their ear that don't really, for lack of better words, I feel like it's not the core issue. And they're fighting for certain things that, is it really going to help society? I'm trying to think of an example of what that would be right now. But yeah,
It's almost like a pseudo, it's like raging against the machine versus, looking within and actually finding what your real passion is. And we see it often, like, name a movement, and there's the Klingons. They're the people who just gravitate towards where the passion and the noise is, and want to have a fight to pick because there's some significance to be found, but it's not, to what we were talking about earlier, it's not that authentic self coming out, and it can become a bit of a trap, become a label actually.
Yeah,
it's like, hey,
I think
I'm
that's
the
good.
person who rises against injustice, full stop. And so I'm going to fight anything that I see or perceive as unjust, versus doing a little bit more work and coming down to what's at the core of this and what's more interior to it, that can actually not just fight the injustice and whack that next mole, but take the plug out of the machine.
Yeah, I think that's well said, Chris. Yeah, the things that students are fighting for, like, you can fight for environmental causes and such, but man, how are you treating buddy that's in your class right now? Like, do you know where they're at and how they're doing? Like, I think there's some significant things that as a result we're missing each other. You know?
And it's not to say those causes don't matter and they're not worth contending for, but if an individual just becomes the person who's always out there trying to pick that next fight, often we can find ourselves losing the soul of it all and the why behind it, and missing the people that are in the closest proximity to us. It's not that doing that far out stuff is not good and worthy, but some of the heroes too. What we're doing is helping find out what breaks your heart about the world, and how can you, in a grade 9, grade 8 classroom, take that thing that breaks your heart and turn that into a passion and put it into action in a way that does something right here. It's like the concentric circles, right? Like starting with why and then moving out to what's the closest proximity that I can start to shape this, versus just, I think this is where we come back to the online piece. It's so easy, and it's almost like absolution, right? Like, oh, I clicked on that on that rage post, and now I feel like I have given my token to the cause, and therefore I'm absolved from giving a damn about that kid next to me who's struggling.
No, like that. Yeah, I totally agree. I one of the things I used to share in Heroes class is, like, what are the 2 most important days of your life? The day you were born and the day you find out why you were born.
Yeah.
And each individual, you, myself, like, we have different whys we're here. And I think with the mass media and all that kind of stuff, they're feeding, no, this is what your purpose is. This is what your cause actually is, through whether it's the music that we're listening to or the celebrities that we follow and what their causes are. We're like, oh, yeah, no, I believe that too. Versus, no, why were you put here? What are you supposed to be communicating? What is your actual cause, versus being a bit of a parrot about somebody else's cause, which isn't authentic. And then as a result, you miss what actually really matters that's going on around you, and bringing change today versus, like you said, pressing that like button and see, look, I made my stand.
Yeah. And it's not the action. It's not the action. It's the reason behind the action is that more interior. We look at, problems, and it's easier, I guess, to talk about, okay, what's at the root of the opiate epidemic, or what's at the root of this current issue that we need to really solve if we're actually going to stop this from reoccurring time and time again, right? But it comes down to that authenticity and identity. And it's so easy, especially when there's a passion, when there's a movement, when there's lots of people doing it, to not just rage against that machine, but to identify ourselves as that. And we talk about the identity traps, the walls, the circumstances, the fears, and the labels. These aren't just challenges we face, but when we live from those, we start to identify ourselves as such. And like we were talking about Robin McGeer earlier, and he's in our Heroes program, and he didn't have this issue, but so many student athletes are a good example of a great label. You're the student athlete, you're the hockey superstar, but what happens when that false identity falls down? The people who are able to stand the test of time and rebound and bounce forward and do meaningful things, well, they were great at this, but that's not who they saw themselves as. And it's that ability to have that authentic process, I think, to really know, okay, who am I and what is it? What are my strengths that I can lend to this thing I'm passionate about? Who am I before, during, and after the storm? That I think is so important, especially when we're trying to correct injustices in the world, because we can fall into that pattern of just flavor of the monthing it, going from cause to cause to cause. Professional protesters, we've seen that in the news. People who just go on Craigslist and look for the next protest to go and dress up and be that person for. And not that we don't need people to show up and protest and be a part of these movements and these causes, but we're not going to get to the roots of them if the people who are doing it aren't authentic about their why and who they are to begin with. What do you like? How do you? This is a lot to unpack, and I maybe went on a bunny trail here, but like just thinking about that sense of identity and why. Like, what are your thoughts on why is that so easy for young people and adults alike? But like specifically in like the university students, we've known this for generations. Like, there's the ones that protest the hippie movement all the way to today, right? What is it about that that's so entertaining or so pulling or so motivating for young people to dive into something like that versus doing something closer to home that might not be as flashy but is far more insignificant and good for their own personal development?
I wonder if it goes back to what we were talking about in regards to just being authentic and dealing with messy things, exposing the mess. When you're dealing with people that are around you, it brings up your own stuff, your own attitudes come up, and you're not that pretty picture, And people get to see that when you're up close with others. Other people get to see who you really are. Whereas the online, the protesting, can be a bit of a facade. It's easier, it's safer. I know this is a sure thing, what this looks like, and this is how I'm going to present myself to the world. But no, when it comes to me interacting with you, I don't know what you're going to say next.
Yeah.
How do I respond to that, Versus a cause. Like, no, this is how we go about it.
Yeah.
People are going to tell me what to say and what to do, and I'm just going to show up. Versus, I got to get my hands dirty with you. And, and I think of school in a school setting for kids. Like, there's awkward people in school.
Yeah.
And it is easier to hang out with the people that you know.
Mm-hmm.
But some of the people that are on the outskirts, that don't quite fit in per se, or respond, or are socially awkward, or are missing all the social cues.
Yeah.
Interacting with them makes me feel uncomfortable. I wonder what my friends think. Like, there's just lots of things that make it messy.
I'm just thinking in my head here, like, now I'm thinking out loud, like it seems similar to apathy, but it's like, it's not real apathy unless it's from the apathy region of France or something like that. But it rhymes with apathy, but it's almost like at its worst, what came to mind is like the virtue signaling is almost like a legalistic, almost like Pharisees. Like, hey, like I'm just going to make sure I do the right thing, do the token prayer, do the demonstration, and I'm okay. But I don't really care about others, nor do I want to be exposed by myself. So it's much more complicated than the general apathy of like, I just don't want to care about anything, which is definitely prevalent. I definitely struggled with that as a youngster. But this concept of it's almost like a misplaced passion that is absolving them of doing that real work, that real human connection piece.
Yeah, I think I think you're onto something there. And even calling it a form of apathy. Because, yeah, like, it's able to be identified because it doesn't come across as authentic. And so you're like,
To some of us, others are just out there saying, "Yeah, more of this."
right, but something's going
An
on.
in group that's like validating it as it goes.
Yeah. But I even think of like the kids in the classroom, when they're fighting for something and they're pushing back and they're saying, you teachers, you do da da da, like, and there's just a fight and they might have tears coming down their eyes because they're fighting for maybe a student in their class or something like that, right? You're treating them unjustly and it just stirs up the whole
Yeah.
class, but there's something else that they're looking for. Like it's a bit of a cover up.
Yeah.
You know what? It's a wall.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a wall.
Yeah.
And there's something that's softer that's behind that wall that comes out at teachers or in the class or whatever, and it seems like, well, it's a cause and you were wrong and they were fighting for this. And so don't punish them or whatever for their actions. But yeah, no, there's, because of how it even comes out.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Usually there's so few causes and reasons of the day, and I don't want to get into anything political here because I want to see young people stepping up and making a change for the things that they see and the things that are painful about the world. But it's almost like a version of that I'm okay, you're okay thing. So finding that in-group, that acceptance of, hey, we're doing the thing that has a bigger purpose and that's all we need to worry about, versus really getting in touch with who we are and being able to do the messier stuff. Like it's hard to have a debate, let alone an argument in your friend group or your classroom. And it can become a bit of an escapism, especially so much of this is done online. It's posts, reposts, likes, comments, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that gives you a bit of an anonymity as well as feeds that dopamine that's looking for like, hey, I did the good thing. I checked the box. That's a big one to wrestle with, and I do think that those are often though the people that put themselves out there. Though it's almost like the old acting rules, like a director should always hire the overactor versus the underactor. It's easier to get the overactor to tone it down than to bring something out of someone who's not able to stand on a stage, so to speak. And I think with the Heroes 2 program, we're helping them to really bring it into their way of being and their personal strengths and developing leadership skills and critical thinking skills along the way to not just make it a token or a trend that I did for that season of my life, but actually make social change a part of who they are and how they go about their life from their core out versus just acting out. But when it comes to the kids that are really apathetic. Like I remember when I was going through my really rebellious years, I had a conversation with my dad, and something I said that I still remember to this day, and I never want to be there again, is I'm tired of striving. I'm tired of aiming high. I'd rather just aim low so that if I fail, no one will even care. I'm tired of that boom bust cycle. And that led me, that season of my life, I was super apathetic, and I was just, doing whatever I could to feed that sense of need for belonging, need to be the tough guy, need to be the cool guy, need to be the person who my friends liked, who girls liked, who lived a dangerous life. And this conversation makes me think of those people as well, who aren't out there trying to be seen as good, but I've maybe reached a level of apathy where either they're striving for something negative or not even striving for anything and are just like, hey, I don't want to get up tomorrow. It has nothing for me. I'd rather just sit in my room behind my computer. What do you see? Like you're working with young people every day and walking with them, not just in the classroom, but you're actually like mentoring them through your work. How do you unpack that young person and help them understand or help them get from apathy to a sense of self, a sense of confidence, and a sense of direction?
Let me ask you a question first. Like, was it fatigue? So did you feel fatigued?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Definitely in some of my earlier experiences of burnout, right? Like false expectations, or not even false expectations. Like I had this going and then it didn't work out. And I was striving for this and I had this big vision and I'm just exhausted.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm tired of trying.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wonder, Chris, if sometimes we just need to give kids permission to rest.
Hmm. Hmm.
Teaching, being in the schools and even in the community and such, post-COVID, like kids needed to rest and they needed like to physically stop, I think, and deal with their insides, you know, and what's going on. And so I think for teachers as adults, being able to recognize that in kids and helping them to just be and giving them permission. That's something that I've learned. I mean, I'm not a counselor, and so, but giving kids permission, that word, it does something. Giving them permission to just be, to learn who they are, or even just in a moment of a place of rest and understanding that there's seasons where healing needs to take place, where you can press pause.
Not just to stop, think, and choose, but to actually step away.
Yeah. Yeah. And just allowing them. And so, like, one of the things that I definitely see with families is that, like, kids are so busy, and to try and find time to do something, like, there's just so much that's going on now. I know there's kids that are doing nothing, but I just find in society, people are looking for them to do something, to be active. And as a result, like, where is the self-reflection time? For myself personally, I am an extrovert, and I've been an extrovert, but I look back in my junior high, senior high years and how much time I spent reflecting in my journal. Like, and even to this day, like, I know as an adult that to keep me from over-exaggerating, from being too much,
Yeah.
I need to be alone.
Right? We get caught up in rat races everywhere. And just like we were talking about with the movement of the day, we also, even as parents, it's our kid is this, but we want them to be that. We want them to have this life. We want them to be successful. And so we push them into more walls, into more labels of you need to be this because right now you're that. And don't give them that time to rest and reflect on who they actually are. We especially in Western society, it's so much about human doing as a sense of self-worth, as a sense of purpose, as a sense of affirmation, to the point where we have a generation of adults who identify with what they do. And if you ask them who they are, like, they get squirmy. They don't want to open up about it. Last question about, like, if you could unpack this in a simple way, like if you were to talk to a parent or a teacher and they were struggling with this, whatever their kid is, whether they're the one out there just trying to find a cause to make them feel okay and check the box, or they're sitting at home completely apathetic, or they're almost on that destructive path, what would be the first way to help them get beyond that apathy and into a pattern, into a journey of authenticity? Because I do kind of see after this, I have a theory now, thanks Alison, that the opposite of apathy is authenticity. So how would you invite, or how would you, what's the first step for a parent, a mentor, or a teacher to open up that can?
Yeah. The thought that comes to my mind is for us to be able to recognize and discern it when a kid is, this is my authentic self, and they reveal it and they show it. To then highlight it and praise it and just recognize it. Because there's so much stuff that comes out of a kid. And like there was a student and we're working on this project to do this assembly. And I was concerned about, okay, what are you going to bring? You know, because they've got causes. They've got the causes, you know, but to make sure that they're safe in presenting this to the student body and in front of parents as well. And I was like, okay, well, come back, show me what you got. And when they came back and showed me what they got, what they had, it was like when I read it, what they were going to present, I was like, this is it. This is it. And I could recognize it wasn't just stuff that somebody else said. This was something that came from their heart. And they were nervous about it, but when I was like, oh my goodness, this is so good. This is it. Like, this is exactly like, yes, yes, and yes. And to see their face in it, and they were just so relieved that I was at least even able to recognize that this was authentic and this was something coming from their heart versus other stuff. You know, and I think in the midst of us doing so much, to make sure that we are slow enough as leaders, as adult leaders, to be able to see when a kid's presenting, whether it's an idea, work, whether it's artwork or written work, when something is authentic, and then highlighting it, acknowledging it, so that they can embrace it because you've embraced it.
It's like, I talk about this as the core of what we do, is we equip the teachers, the parents, the mentors to bring out the best in those kids. And like you said, it's got to start with identifying what is in them. It's not to inflict on them or to prescribe to them a model or a mold or a label that they need to do. It's to find out what is best about them and help them to build on that. The causes will come, but if you don't know who you are, you don't have a because, you can fall into any cause that may or may not be legit, A. B, it can be a huge distraction from who you're supposed to be and who you're becoming, and actually make you less effective at that thing that you want to change about the world. Alison, I could go for another hour. We're at time though, and we'll definitely have you on again. Alison Springer, you're amazing, and this conversation is just the start, and so much to unpack. Hope anybody that's listening understands that you are available as a speaker, as someone to do workshops. As you got a website, it's YWOP, youngwomenofpower.ca. Tall, gorgeous black girl on Twitter. I love that you got that handle. On Instagram, on Twitter, it's Alison Springer. And your youth speaker profiles at youthspeakers.ca. Anything else that you're working on that you want to tell the listeners about, or how to get in touch with you?
Yeah, no, I think that's about it. There's definitely some stuff that I'm working on that I can't share just yet, but I'm just so thankful, and I just want to encourage even just the listeners in this that everything that you've experienced, like what I was saying before about you're fighting the wrong battle.
Yeah.
That sometimes you need to fight those battles to do the right battle. And so that's kind of where I feel like I'm in right now. All the past experiences are led up to something significant for today.
Awesome. And if you want to hear the rest of the story, it's in Heroes 2, and we'll definitely have you back to update the video on that and continue to share your story and talk about how we can help young people build the strength-based identity and be change makers from that point of strength. Thank you so much.
Cool.